this presentation only addresses the nutrient rules. The city's runoff control rules are not changing. So if we say today something like an SCM is required or an SCM isn't required, that we're specifically speaking to the nutrient rules, not to runoff. All right, so let's get into some of the content. We'll be starting off with Brian McHugh.
So I'm going to go over the different design manuals and documents that will be applicable moving forward with the rule changes. First and foremost is our City of Raleigh Stormwater Management Design Manual, with the caveat that the Chapter 3 will no longer be applicable due to the changes in the Neuse rules. That being said, a updated version of the design manual is currently being worked on and will reflect the new rules. Additionally, the City of Raleigh Guidelines for Land Disturbing Activity, also known as GILDA, will remain in effect until its contents is eventually replaced and incorporated into the updated City of Raleigh Stormwater Manual. Moving forward, due to the rule changes, the current NCDEQ Stormwater Design Manual and the use of the Minimum Design Criteria, or MDCs, will be required by the updated Neuse rules. And for SCM credit values, please reference the SCM credit document, specifically Table A2 for the appropriate SCM credit values. Also, please note that after the effective text change, the city will no longer accept the archived NCDEQ manual as a reference. And finally, a guidance document will be provided following this webinar, which will contain guidance for the meeting of the UDO requirements. And again, this document will also be incorporated into our updated City of Raleigh Stormwater Design Manual. And with changing of rules, it's important to address vested rights. So projects that have submitted stormwater solutions prior to the text change have vested rights in choosing to comply with either regulations effective at the time of submittal or the new text change regulations. And with that, I will pass it along to Sally.
We know that lots of you have questions about the Common Plan of Development and what that means, since that is new to the Neuse rules in the City of Raleigh. We have adopted the state required definition from the North Carolina Administrative Code. I've put that definition on the screen. But I know that lots of you have questions about how we will interpret it. So I'm just going to start with some things that we do consider to be a common plan of development and something we don't consider to be a common plan of development. So if you're submitting a project as one case, the parcels are dependent on each other and have to be submitted as the same case, that will be a common plan of development. That we are very clear on. We're also clear that if it's two residential lots, just two, sharing a driveway, that is not a common plan of development. I had hoped to have a longer list and less gray area to share with you today, but I'm still working on obtaining that information from others here at the city of how we will be interpreting it, and that will be shared in written material as going forward. So we do hope to narrow down the gray area to give you some certainty in terms of what would be considered a common plan of development. I do have some examples of things that have been submitted over the past year or so that would be considered part of a common plan of development. So some examples would be two lots that are each under a half an acre, but they're submitted for something that's considered commercial, including townhouses with a shared driveway, that they are dependent on each other and would be a common plan. Something like a parking lot that's on a separate parcel but serves an adjacent building would be considered part of a common plan of development. And recombining multiple parcels for a new residential development that's over an acre, if it was single family, that would be considered a common plan of development.
So the one large change that is coming for our grandfathered lot section, if you're familiar with that and do residential, with the new Neuse changes, will be residential lots that are greater than an acre. So even if they were considered, like currently in our code as a grandfathered lot, they'd fall under our zoning limits. Now they will have a 5% BUA or impervious limit. If the lot has greater impervious than 5%, they're going to get kicked into our other code section. So the zoning limits will no longer apply to these larger single family used for 1 or 2 unit dwelling use. So just be aware that that's a big change for residential specifically. Grandfathered lots that are an acre or less for approved residential use, or half an acre or less used for any other approved use, will still be allowed to use the zoning table as our current code is stated.
Thanks, Lauren. And that would be if those are not part of a common plan of development. We're going to pause now and take some questions, and Lauren's going to be reading those from the chat.
Luke Perkins is asking if a project submitted before May 1, but doesn't get processed until after May 1, does it get grandfathered?
That is an excellent question, and I will need to check on that. I will check on that and provide you a response in the written document
And then
and individually by email.
We've got one other question. For redevelopment with decrease in impervious area, are nutrient requirements still in effect?
Can you read that again?
Yes, for redevelopment with a decrease in impervious, are nutrient requirements in effect?
So our code will continue to have an exemption for substitution of impervious. And so if you're substituting and decreasing or equaling the amount of impervious area, that will still be exempt or meet the requirements in that way.
We've got another one. What is the effective date for the new MDC and Neuse SNAP rules?
So this was passed by City Council on Tuesday, and so the effective date will be May 1st, 2023. All right. So I want to talk about the treatment requirements because this is changing. So there's 3 things I'm going to talk about in this section. One is how to calculate your percent BUA. And to be clear, BUA is equivalent to impervious area, but that's the terminology the state has asked us to use. So how to calculate your percent BUA to determine if an SCM is required, how to determine how much water quality volume needs to be treated in a primary SCM, and how to determine the site area to put into the SNAP tool. And that is going to vary based on whether you have any existing impervious area on your site. So if you have existing built upon area that was in place prior to May 1st, 2001, and that May 1st, 2001 is the date that the city originally adopted the Neuse rules, or was permitted before May 1st, 2001, or vested before May 1st, 2001, then that BUA does not count towards the percent BUA, will not require treatment, and will be excluded from the site area in SNAP because that was placed prior to the Neuse rule becoming effective. If you have existing BUA that was permitted under the Neuse rules that began on May 1st, 2001, but before the effective date of the TC 123, so before May 1st, 2023, or permitted with vested rights after that date, that area will count towards the percent BUA because it's part of the area that's required to comply with the Neuse rules. But it won't be required to have a primary SCM because it's already been permitted. But it might have to do additional buy down, and I will be getting into more detail on that. And it might be in the site area for the SNAP calculations, depending on the method you use, and we'll be getting more into that as well. If your site has existing BUA that was placed after May 1st, 2001, but was not permitted at the time it was placed, then it will be treated as newly proposed BUA. And so it'll be exactly the same as new. We see that occasionally when something has been placed without a permit. So finally, this is thinking ahead. So if you get something permitted, you know, later this year, and then a few years from now, come back to add additional impervious areas to that site, any BUA that was permitted after the effective date, so after May 1st, 2023, counts towards your percent BUA, would have previously been treated by a primary SCM, so an additional SCM wouldn't be required for that BUA. But it might have to do additional buy down, and you will include that area in SNAP. All right, so let's talk about how you calculate the percent BUA. For a greenfield site, it's very simple. You take your parcel BUA over your parcel area to get your percent BUA. For a redevelopment site, you're doing your BUA, your parcel BUA minus the stuff that was placed prior to 2001 over your parcel area minus the BUA prior to 2001 to get your percent BUA. So you're excluding that impervious area from prior to 2001 or prior to the Neuse rule becoming effective. All right, so this part of the new Neuse rule is that if your site is more than 24% BUA, then all of the new BUA must be treated with a primary SCM. And you can determine what is considered a primary SCM by going to the SCM crediting document that's on the same website as the state's, as NTDEQ's stormwater manual. And table A2 will tell you if it's a primary SCM or not, or if it's a secondary SCM. And then if your BUA is less than or equal to 24%, you're allowed to use an SCM, but it's not required, and so buy down only could be done. So now let's look at if you're required to do an SCM. So you're going to determine the water quality volume. You're going to do that the same way you've been doing that for years. And so for a greenfield site, you're going to calculate the required water quality volume based on all the parcel BUA and treat that volume in primary SCMs. Now we know that there's going to be situations where there's a little bit that drains in a different direction or to the right of way or something like that. So we're going to say you can exclude up to 5% of the site's BUA, that the actual drainage area to the SCM could exclude 5% of the site's BUA, or a max of a quarter acre if those areas can't reach the SCMs. And so that will, because you'll size the water quality volume for all of that, it will result in a slight oversizing of the SCMs. But anyway, you can let us know if you have questions on that. For redevelopment sites, again, you're going to calculate the required water quality volume based on the new parcel BUA. You're going to treat that in a primary SCM. We will allow you to offset that. So if there's some impervious area that you're adding new that is hard to get to the SCM, you could send existing BUA as long as it's not currently being treated by an SCM. All right, now I'm going to move into determining the site area for SNAP. And so for a greenfield site, this is pretty straightforward. You're going to enter the entire parcel or parcels area, the new right-of-way you might be creating as part of this project, and any existing right-of-way where BUA is being added. So basically, you're going to exclude from SNAP the stuff before 2001. You're going to include the newly proposed area and anything permitted under the new rules. So permitted under the rules starting May 1st. And for the stuff in the middle, it depends, and that's what I'm about to talk about. And this screenshot is from our proposed worksheet that will be one of the submittal requirements that we will be releasing and putting on the web early next week. All right, so we're giving you two choices for area that has been subject to the Neuse rules under the old Neuse rules or the old calculation method that is the method until May 1st. So one, method A is you can put all the information in SNAP. The second method is you can do the old BUA in the old method and the new BUA in SNAP and then combine them. So I'm going to show you both of those options. So this is my example site that has an existing development and has proposed development. It has an existing SCM and a new SCM. It has previously done buy down. And so method A is to put it all into SNAP. And so I've summarized the SNAP results here. Whoops. I've summarized the SNAP results here. Basically, there's some buy down required, but previous buy down has already been made, and so additional buy down is not required because the previous buy down exceeds the requirement per SNAP. If I do the same example by method B, I'm doing the previous site calculations, I'm noting the changes, and then I'm redoing the calculations because some of that area that was counted as pervious has now shifted to being impervious, and so I can't include that in the calculations. So that in removing that pervious area, the remaining load, which was 3.6, meeting the target, is now 4.06. So a little bit of additional buy down is needed to keep the old part of the site in compliance. Then I put the new part into SNAP. And in this example, no additional buy down is required because bioretention gets a really high level of treatment. So it was already meeting the target, but there is additional buy down required because of that change from pervious to impervious. I realized that went by really fast, and you might be wondering, how is this possible? I would say we're encouraging people to put stuff, use method A, it's simpler, put it all in SNAP. But you might be asking, well, is that going to be to my benefit? In which case you're welcome to explore method B and see if it is to your benefit for your project. But one of the reasons that it might be, I will show you some comparisons between land cover loading rates under the current method, the 21.2 pounds per acre per year for impervious, 0.6 for undisturbed open space, and 1.2 for the other pervious landscaping. That's the current rates. The SNAP rates, I've looked at what the effective rate is for those land covers, and you'll see that all of these impervious areas, roof, roadway, and then parking, driveway, and sidewalk, are all much lower than the 21.2 in the SNAP tool, where the protected and the pervious are about the same. So the SNAP tool shows lower nutrient loading rates for impervious area. Also, something to be aware of is that the effective removal rates for the SCMs changes. So this table is showing some of the common SCM types, how they were treated in the archived DEQ manual, in the 2018 SCM credit document in terms of percent removal. SNAP does not use percent removal, but I looked at the range in terms of situations where there would be a low effective percent removal and situations where there would be a high effective percent removal. And that varies. It's a very high range for bioretention, and you can see that went up versus the old method. Several things like wet ponds, dry ponds, wetlands, and level or vegetated filter strips have stayed in the same range, where closed sand filters and storm filters have decreased the amount of credit that they get. So that's something to be aware of as you're selecting SCMs. And I'm sure you all, as you use SNAP more, will figure out the effect on your projects. So with that, I'm going to move into questions again. You know, that was a lot of calculations to show. So please put questions in the chat.
We have one for a site with impervious area dating back to the 1920s, and they're adding new impervious area. Would that be considered completely new development?
So if there is existing impervious area that was placed prior to the Neuse rule becoming effective in May 1st, 2001, that would be considered existing. Now, that would be different if that impervious area had been removed and the site had been revegetated. But if it has been existing from the 1920s until current, that would be considered existing, and just the portion being added that's increasing impervious area would be considered new.
That's all the questions I see so far. We'll see if a couple more pop in.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move into the next section. Again, feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. No, if you can document that you're doing substitution of impervious and that the impervious area is decreasing, you would just need to show that calculation and not have to show the SNAP tool calculation. All right, I'm going to move on. Feel free to continue adding questions. I'm going to hand it over to Sean Eggleston.
Morning. Since we're switching to requiring calculations via the SNAP tool, I'll talk about a few things to think about while using it and values that you're inputting into it. This will not be a full formal SNAP tool training. Would encourage you to take one if you're not terribly familiar with the tool. DEQ had offered several. I believe NC State has another one coming up next week that will be a paid training over several hours. If you search for the page we've got on the city's website for the Neuse Nutrient rule changes, I think we've got a link to some of those and maybe some other resources. So the first sheet on the SNAP tool, the project info, I'm just going to address a few of the things that we are looking for. Not all of this is something that you need to input to make the tool work and give you the numbers that we need to see. Just pay attention to error message. SNAP will tell you what is missing if something that is making it cause some errors or anything. So the project name, similar to some other forms that we currently use, we're just going to ask you to use your name for the project and the case number once you know it, say SPR- whatever. We are in the upper Neuse watershed, so in the nutrient management watershed, it will be all of these values you see on your screen that you are pulling in from the drop-down menu. In that middle section for project details, there is a option to say yes or no to whether it's a public linear road or sidewalk project. That should only be selected as yes if it is a project funded by the city of Raleigh. And then down, local cutoff date for the existing BUA, as Sally has said, is going to be May 1st, 2001. That's when the existing ordinance was implemented. The nitrogen export target rate stays at 3.6 pounds per acre per year. We are still not concerned about phosphorus outside of our water supply watershed areas, but if SNAP makes you input a value into that, you can just select 1,000 because it won't be something we were looking for in our review. Second sheet is the land cover characteristics, and this is one of the more important ones. I'll get more in depth into the individual land cover classifications, what they're called in SNAP in a little bit. But one of the more important things to select here is the proper precipitation station. That's going to be what it uses to calculate that annual runoff volume. Generally, we're going to ask you to use the Raleigh station on that. There is now a section in SNAP for offsite or existing land cover areas. Generally, you're never going to be using offsite because of the way SNAP calculates the project area and what we would require to be considered the project area. But given some of those scenarios that Sally previously outlined, where you've got a site that was developed post 2001, now an expansion is proposed, there may be some existing depending on what you're doing that you're inputting down there. But again, never something that is offsite. So I'll just get into all the individual land covers now. Roof is basically going to be any impervious surface that's elevated above the surrounding ground. So all the pollutant loading from it is associated with the atmospheric deposition. There's not really an influence from surrounding landscaping practices or anything. So not necessarily just roof, but basically any impervious surface not at ground level. Slatted decks can be included in this category at either the 50 or the 30% impervious that's currently allowed by our UDO's definition of impervious surface. And roadway is going to be used for the road surfaces in the right-of-way where there is the higher traffic. That includes not just the traffic lanes, but say on-street parking lanes, bike lanes that are connected to the roadway, and anything like that that is at the same level as the street. And outside of the right-of-way on those newer multifamily streets that we are starting to see more of, that would include those parking lanes that are on the subject lots outside of the right-of-way, since they are connected to it and receiving the same runoff from them. Then parking, driveway, sidewalk would be for any other ground level impervious surface that is outside the right-of-way, your patios, your sidewalks, paths, etc. And inside the right-of-way, that would include any impervious surface that is raised above the road level, say a sidewalk up above the curve. And we would also ask that the synthetic turf or any proprietary permeable surfaces that are not approved as permeable pavement per the MDC requirements would also be included in this category, similarly to how we currently do it. Then among the two open areas, protected forest is what the SNAP tool calls what we currently consider to be permanently protected undisturbed open space. This would have to be areas that meet those UDO requirements, which include being permanently fenced off, recorded on a plat, annually inspected, basically considered an SCM in the annual inspection report that's submitted to us on a post-construction site. This can include undisturbed areas of riparian buffer zone 1, given that there are rules requiring that it stay undisturbed forever. Would not include, say, a sewer easement running through zone 1 or any greenway that happens to be in it. But that would be required to be included as protected forest in both the pre-development and post-development conditions. And then managed pervious and landscaping is all other pervious areas on a site. There is the ability to do some custom land covers. One option that we think would be worth thinking about is pools and non-SCM open water. We think that could be input as a custom land cover set at 0% impervious and with the same event mean concentrations as or effluent mean concentrations as an SCM, which would be that 1.18 and 0.11 milligrams per liter for nitrogen and phosphorus. Those three values are things that SNAP will require you to input to use a custom land cover. The next sheet is going to be the SCM characteristics sheet, and rather than sharing a screenshot, since it doesn't really come in cleanly to PowerPoint, I'll just go over some of the things to think about while putting your SCMs into there. The type of SCM you select from the drop-down menu should match the MDC title. So if it's something that you're using to meet regulations, it should be something that has an actual chapter and design requirements in the MDC. There are some other options in there that are used for non-regulatory purposes. Since the hydrologic soil group affects the fate of the runoff treated by the SCM. That's a thing that's important to select the right thing. It should be the HSG at the location of the SCM. In the rare case that the SCM, say, straddles two groups, we're going to ask that you select the less infiltrative of the two. And then you can enter a description, it's the text field, and this should align with how it's labeled in your plans and report, whether you're calling it bioretention cell or SCMs A and B, or however you've got things showing up in your plans. Design storm is still going to be that 1-inch water quality volume, the 1-inch 24-hour storm. If you're using an SCM for regulatory purposes, it should always be 100% sized. And then make sure that you're selecting a land cover taken up by the SCM. That should be included in the drainage area to it and also in your project areas on the land cover sheet.
All right, we're going to pause again for questions.
We did have a question if you could go back over the 5% exclusion from the drainage area when calculating water quality volume.
Sure. So I thought folks might have a question about that. So basically, the state requires 100%. We're saying, okay, you are gonna calculate the water quality volume for 100%, and you're gonna size your SCM based on that. We are also going to check what is the actual drainage area to your SCM. And that actual drainage area to your SCM can exclude at most 0.25 acres of the site's BUA, or exclude 5%, so include 95% or more. Basically a recognition that there might be some small amounts that can't be captured in the drainage area to the SCM, maybe the driveway that drains out to the right of way or something like that. Does that answer your question, or should I go into more detail on that?
See if Melvin, if that makes sense, let me know in the chat. We have another question. Can you quickly revisit the roof surface type for a slatted deck area? Is this counted?
Yeah, I can take that. I would point you toward Chapter 12 of our UDO, which contains the definitions for terms in there. Under the impervious surface definition, we currently require / allow decks to be counted as 50% impervious area. So say you've got a slatted deck taking up 200 square feet in total footprint, we would allow that to be considered 100% or 100 square feet of impervious surface. 30% if the surface under it is clean washed gravel or clean washed stone, excuse me. Then again, if it's, say, a patio under an existing deck, that would be required to be 100% impervious surface. And that's the way our UDO currently requires decks to be treated, and we're going to continue to require that. Does that answer the question?
Haley, let me know if that, oh, yep, she said that's perfect. Awesome. Yeah, so the way decks are counted is not necessarily going to change if you're familiar with that for the city. Let me see if we've got anything else. We had one other question that I think Kendall's going to try to address in her section. So if there's still questions there, let us know at our next break. I'll wait just another second before we keep going. If anybody else has any questions, just drop them in the chat.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Kendall Effler for the next section.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to be going over the nutrient buy-down threshold per the new requirements. And this is more reiterating a slide that Sally covered earlier regarding buy down only can be used if your BUA is less than or equal to 24%. You can still have an SCM and get some of your reduction through that SCM, but it does not have to be a primary SCM. And I want to make clear that this does not take away the runoff reduction requirements for development in the city of Raleigh. And so if you need an SCM for detention or peak flow attenuation, that is still a requirement, and you can take advantage of any water quality benefits from those SCMs. Developments with more than 24% BUA must treat all BUA with a primary SCM before buy down to their nutrient target. And in this case, buy down may or may not be needed based on what reduction you're achieving from that primary SCM. And then previously, the Neuse rules had thresholds for residential and commercial buy down availability. Those no longer apply because the state has replaced those with the 24% BUA. In terms of buy down calculations, the amount of buy down was calculated as the annual load in pounds per year, and then multiplied by 30 years, resulting in the total amount of pounds for that 30-year period that needed to be bought down. And that's how it was presented to the city, and that's how the city issued our nutrient buy down memos that allowed for the purchase of those credits. Now the state will be looking at these values as kind of perpetual. That's not how they phrased it, but they've recognized that this 30-year lifespan is not the reality of these practices. And so nutrient banks will now be selling these credits by the pound, and that is how the calculations need to be presented by the city, and that's how we will be representing it in our nutrient buy down memos. I'm going to cover what needs to be submitted to the city surrounding, the water quality deliverables associated with SNAP, but also buy down and things specific to the city. So previously, we required that pre and post development exhibits breaking out impervious and pervious area be attached to the SIA. Those exhibits now need to show the land cover broken out by these SNAP categories. They need to list the square footage associated with that, and it needs to be consistent with what has been input into the SNAP tool. The SNAP tool PDF should be provided for the worksheets used in these calculations. So the 5 tabs that we'll need as PDFs attached to the SIA are the project info, land cover characteristics, SCM characteristics, and then the outputs of the nutrient export summary and the nutrient offset. We will also need the Excel file that was used in those calculations. We are required by the state to have a database of those spreadsheets for their, overall calculating purpose for the state. And then Sally covered earlier that there was going to be written documentation covering, what we've covered in this presentation, and that there was going to be a calculation worksheet that covers what is going to be put into the SNAP tool per the city's requirement. And that needs to be attached as a PDF to the SIA as well. And just a reminder, the SIA for projects has to be signed and sealed by a certified professional. So all of these things should be under that cover of the SIA, except for the actual Excel file, which is for documentation purposes. And then, as many of you know, that there are watershed protection overlay districts within the city that have more stringent requirements in terms of built upon area and nutrient reduction thresholds, target thresholds. The Falls Watershed Protection Overlay and the Swift Creek Watershed Protection Overlay both have the same more stringent nutrient target loads and will have different inputs into the project information tab for the SNAP tool. These requirements are not changing. They are the same as they have been in UDO section 9.5.2 and 3. It's just a matter of how they're input into the SNAP tool. So for the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District, this is a nutrient management watershed through the DEQ. And so the nutrient management watershed inputs will be representative of the Falls Lake watershed, specifically the lower falls. All of the areas within Raleigh's jurisdiction fall within that lower falls if you were in this overlay. The nitrogen export rate and phosphorus export rate will be updated to those thresholds of 2.2 and 0.33 pounds per acre per year. And again, you can find those thresholds defined in the UDO section as they were before. Swift Creek, on the other hand, is not a nutrient management watershed per DEQ, but it is within the Neuse River Basin, which is a nutrient management watershed. But we have our more stringent requirements, so it has to be updated for the city of Raleigh. So the changes here would be under stormwater details. The local government nutrient requirements are not the same as the state. And so this selection would be no rather than yes for all of the previous projects within the Neuse or the Falls. The nitrogen export rate would be input as that 2.2 or 0.33 pounds per acre per year for phosphorus. And the Swift Creek Watershed Protection Overlay District has not changed, and the requirements are the same. Was the question answered regarding how are we making the conversion comparison between previous nutrient purchase and new nutrient purchase?
I can try to answer that. So basically, if you have previously purchased nutrients, you purchased it in pounds, and it was pounds over 30 years. So you would divide it by 30 to get pounds per year.
We have a couple questions that have come in. See here, let me scroll back up. So it looks like they need a little bit more clarification on the 5% that we're allowing you to not send, or the quarter acre.
Yeah.
So this question says, or this comment, SNAP requires you to put in the full site area and all of its nutrient exports. So when you size your SCM based on the entire site area. However, it's not always possible to direct all the runoff to the SCM. And the question is, how do we meet the 95% requirement for the drainage area to the SCM?
The state requires you to send 100% the drainage area to your SCM should actually be 100% of the new BUA. We at the city of Raleigh are going out on a limb and saying, we don't think that that's always going to be feasible at every site. And so for redevelopment sites, we know that you can offset with existing BUA if it isn't already treated by an SCM. But we know for greenfield sites that could be a problem. So the city is saying, we will consider you compliant if you're sending at least 95% or no less than a quarter acre under. Let me show you a calculation which might help. Might make it more confusing. We will see. So let's say you have a 5 acre lot. Whoop, there we go. Say you have a 5 acre lot. You calculate your water quality volume, 10,709 cubic feet of water quality is required. Great. But let's say you can only send 2.95 acres of BUA, so not quite all your BUA, and 1 acre of impervious. So only 3.95 acres out of 5 acres, or only 2.95 out of 3 acres of BUA is going to your SCM. So you're actually only providing, if you 100% sized, you would only be providing 10,324. So you'd actually be oversizing by 385 cubic feet. So you have to send that full required, you have to size it for the full required amount. And we would check the water quality volume actually being required and actually being provided, and the sizing of the SCM. Does that answer the question? I know that might have made it more confusing, but if you want to make it simple, the state says 100%. So if you send 100%, you'll be complying. We're with this 5% or 0.25 acres, we're trying to say, hey, we acknowledge that it's hard to send actually 100% to it. So as long as you're sizing the water quality volume for 100% of the water quality volume and sending at least 95% of the BUA to the SCM, that would be acceptable.
There's a question related, and I think we've discussed this internally. The state has a statement about subjectivity to what is practical versus assigning, like we're trying to kind of assign a value to what we're sending or percentage or area to the SCM. There was a question about, can we just assume what is practical versus having a set percentage?
I'm not sure where that practical language is. I don't know that that's in our UDO.
Okay.
Or in the model ordinance.
So there's a question about the public right-of-way. Will public right-of-way and roadway be required to be treated if in excess of 5%?
So we are currently interpreting, and unless we hear otherwise from DQ, that this is for the site area and that we would allow buy down only for the right of way, for the existing right of way. This is for any new right of way or new parcel area. So anything that was existing parcel area needs to be 100% treated by a SCM.
And then does the BUA in the right-of-way need to be included?
So our interpretation is that you do need to meet the target of 3.6 pounds per acre per year for your entire site, which includes the right-of-way. But we are interpreting it that you don't have to send any improvements in the existing right-of-way to your SCM, just new right-of-way.
Can you go back to your example, Sally, you have for the sizing for water quality volume? There was a question about that. So the question is, in the example, there's 1 acre not draining to the SCM, which seems more than the 5% allowable.
So, and you'll notice in this case that, so the state's rule is that 100% of your new built upon area, so your new BUA must go to that. So in this example, there's 3 acres of BUA and 2.95 acres of BUA is going to the SCM. They're excluding an acre of pervious area in addition to that, but that's fine. Your pervious area is not required to be treated by an SCM.
And then is there any difference? Does it matter if the right of way is NCDOT, city right of way, private right of way?
No.
And we did start recording this. Our IT person is on at a conference this week. So at some point we will post the links to the recording and to any other materials that, we'll have for submittal purposes. Eventually there was a couple of questions about that. And I know
Yeah.
Sean dropped some links in the chat for the text changes, but we will post this probably early next week.
Yes, if you go to the website that's now shown on the screen, that contains links to the text change, that contains links to the DEQ upcoming paid workshop. We can also put a link to their recording of the March 27th free workshop. We will post the recording link there, and we will send out an email to everyone who is signed up for this webinar, and we will post our written guidance there. Yeah, our person who does the web stuff is at a conference today and tomorrow, so we plan to get that up early next week.
I asked this one. That was it. Did you? Yes. Should be good. And I don't see any other questions right now.
So yeah, as I said, you can keep checking that website. Any changes, we will we'll communicate in a variety of ways, including to including email to everyone who's signed up for this webinar. If you do have follow-up questions, feel free to email me. Either me or one of our team members will get back to you with a response, either individually or directing you to a response made on the website, if we think it's something that might impact multiple people.
So we've got another question. I did miss one. If a commercial site is over the 24% BUA, but it treats all of that BUA with a primary SCM, resulting in a loading rate of greater than 10 pounds per acre per year, can it make up the difference down to the 3.6 with just buy down?
So 10 pounds per acre per year does not make any difference anymore. So instead of there being a buy down threshold of 10 pounds per acre per year, you can start doing buy down after you have treated all your impervious area with a primary SCM, or if you're over 24%. If you're equal to or under 24%, you can go to buy down to begin with, just like if you were under 10 pounds per acre per year now. So for a commercial site, if let's say you're 50% impervious, if you treat all your built upon area with an SCM, then whatever number you're at, once you have done that treatment, you can buy down to 3.6.
Looks like that's good. And then there's a couple questions related to buy down. Can you go over the conversion for the pounds to pounds per year that is going to be changing associated with buy down?
Yeah, so right now you do, let me kind of go back up to a slide that might help with this. So in the current method, you would get your loading rate, you would get your load, you would compare your loading rate for the site to the 3.6 to get your load in pounds per acre, in pounds per year, and then you would multiply that by 30, and that would be your buy down rate. So in this example, if you had bought down previously 47.2, if you divide that by 30, you get back to pounds per year, and this is what your perpetual credit would be, is the 158, or the actual pounds bought divided by 30. Because right now we multiply by the load in pounds per year by 30.
Perfect.
We would hope that the rate, that 1 pound per year would be equivalent in cost to 30 pounds. That would make economic sense, but we are not running the banks.
Well, let us know if that conversion description makes sense. I think that was a good kind of clear point out there. There is a question if the recently adopted rules are on the text change website currently.
Yes. So if you go to the Neuse Rules website, this is the website link we gave. Is this being shown?
Yes.
Okay. If you go to this proposed UDO changes, then you can find the full draft ordinance, which was adopted on Tuesday, and we will need to update our website to reflect that. But the full draft ordinance pops up there.
And then I don't know that we will have an answer for this question, Michael, but he asks, have the nutrient banks been set up for this new buy down conversion yet?
That is what DEQ indicated in the webinars that they did on March 27th and March 28th. So that's all we know.
So do the new regulations apply to projects currently in ASR or subdivision review?
So if you are currently in ASR, subdivision, or SPR, you are vested. So as long as you continue through that and don't let it sunset or that sort of thing.
A straight conversion, this is another question about the buy down, between pounds and pounds per year assumes the tools give the same result. Does Raleigh see it this way?
I guess I'm not quite sure what you're getting at. Are the calculations methods the same? No. I think that's one of the things I was trying to show in this method A versus method B. But if you have previously bought down pounds, we will honor those as pounds.
Let us know if any more clarification on that example for previous buy down needs to be expanded on a little bit more. Let me see if we've got, let's see what this. Well, that looks like it was good and clear. I don't see any other questions so far. If there's any, drop them in the chat.
Yeah, again, feel free to email me, and I might be me that responds to you, or I might ask someone on the team to respond to you. But we, happy to take your questions and would appreciate your feedback if there's something we need to make clear in the written guidance. that we release so that we can, you know, make it easier for you to be able to submit calculations for this new method.
I don't see anything else coming in on the chat. I think that's about all we have. I'll keep this open for just another couple more minutes if anyone thinks of anything. But otherwise, that's all we have.
Yeah, thank you all for tuning in. We really appreciate you, engaging with this process and getting ahead of the new rules. And yeah, we'll hang out until 10:15 if there's any additional questions in the chat. But thank you for coming. And again, we will email you to let you know when the recording and the written guidance are posted to the website, which should be early next week.